Alrighty, so today I've got best cards. This is the best cards list for Twilight of the Republic. Had a chance now. Set's been out, been playing, been testing. So although this is a first impression, I still have some information that I've been able to gather from playing with these cards. So I've made some opinions so far, and I'd like to share them. As always, a list like this, it's not meant to be taken like as exact, like this is definitely number one, number two. These are just a lot of good cards mostly, and because we like lists around here, I've put them into a top 10, but really, I'm taking this opportunity to kind of talk about some of the most powerful cards in the set and what I think we can do with them or what to look out for in the future with them. And lots of cool stuff here. So before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. Getting real close to 4K. It'd be awesome to hit it soon. And as always, check out the Patreon if you're looking for some more content from me. Been posting a lot of new decks there recently. All right, here we go. We're going to start with honorable mentions, and I've got 8 of them. So this is some stuff that, these are mostly callouts, cards that I want to talk about, or cards that maybe I actually thought were a little better than I think they are now, although I still think they're quite good. So start with breaking in here. It's just another pump, but having a lot of pumps is good. It's still a little worse than Surprise Strike most of the time, but of course giving a unit Saboteur can be really important. Seeing this getting played in like space aggro decks right now who can get bricked sometimes by some powerful Sentinels, things like Concord Dawns, Bright Hopes, right? So just being able to get that last burst of damage is nice. It's not replacing Surprise Strike, it's just giving you more of these pumps, and the card's been pretty good. Merciless Contest. This is, for the most part, a worse version of Power of the Dark Side, although if you don't want to hit your opponent's leader, it actually can be better sometimes. But yeah, mostly it's just a worse version, but it's not in blue, right? So it gives decks that weren't playing blue kind of a very hard removal option, something that is not often accessible in colors such as green or even yellow, right? Like red has some hard removal options, usually damage based, and blue of course has a ton, but now villain, can just play this, and of course they can play it in conjunction with Power of the Dark Side, so decks that play very few units, like these hard control decks, mono blue villain decks, blue red villain decks that just don't play a lot of units. This is kind of just redundant copies of Power of the Dark Side there. So very powerful. Clear the Field is a new bounce, right? Just a cheap one. It costs less than Waylay, but it also doesn't hit everything. But of course, the upside here is that this can actually wipe tokens off the board completely, like all droids, all clones. So I think it's the kind of card that will ebb and flow depending on what is more prominent in the meta. I think certainly against aggressive decks for more controlling or mid-rangey yellow hero decks, they might just want to play it because it's a way to answer an early play. Just if you don't want to jam your own 2-drop into your opponents, you can just kind of bounce it, right? And of course it's card disadvantage, but sometimes mid-range decks or controlling decks don't care so much about the early card disadvantage because they're going to make it up down the line. So Clear the Field is a powerful effect to have access to while having the very important text of just kind of being a token hoser. Darth Maul is a call out here. I think for the most part, the card itself is not gonna see a ton of play unless a red-green, specifically a red villain with Energy Conversion Lab base combo becomes a prominent deck. He is a 5-cost do nothing, as I call them. He doesn't do anything unless you give him ambush. I think those units tend to be just way too slow to be good unless you pair them with ambush. But, and this is the important thing, he is incredible with Energy Conversion Lab. One of the best units, certainly I think the best for a red-green villain deck. So how good can a red-green villain deck be? That's going to take some time to figure out. I still think Boss could be pretty good. He shores up that early game with bounties. The other red villains, I have mixed opinions about them. I think red-green villain in general has a very tough early game. Like their turn 1 and turn 2 plays tend to just not be very powerful other than like the ramp on turn 2. And sometimes that is a main reason why these decks struggle, especially into more aggressive decks. But Darth Maul can do a lot and carry this kind of strategy a little bit. So I see some potential there. The next two are both 4/4s, and they're cards that I actually was a little higher on to start. I thought General Grievous was going to be like one of the best cards. Just like 3-cost 4/4 with a bunch of irrelevant text was still just very exciting. And while I still think the card is very good, it's still not feeling like it's always sliding in to these blue villain strategies, because they are very, very glutted on 3-cost options, especially when they're in green. Like green blue villain already has like a bunch of equity using ramp at that 3-cost slot, and then you start talking about other options there. There's Death Troopers, there's removal like Power of the Dark Side and Perilous Position, there's Calculating Magna Guard, which we'll talk about in a bit, Client if you're going that route. At 4, like there's just so much, I'm not even naming all of them, that like if there was a more aggressive villain blue deck, which there could be, I think maybe with Krennic, 4/4 is just an awesome stat line. It's just, it doesn't actually kill like a lot of the opponent's turn 2 plays because they are often 3/5s. So if you are the controlling deck, it's just playing an aggressively statted beater going to be better than being defensive. And that's why I think a lot of the time he's not making the cut for me yet. But I would certainly like to look at just villain blue decks that aren't really control decks, and I think he would really shine there. Sabine Wren, another card I'm pretty high on, although I think part of what might hold her back is the fact that yellow mid-rangey heroes might not make the cut, but I still think there's a lot of potential there. The card itself is quite powerful. I think being able to play a turn 3 unit that you know just can't die, right? It can't get attacked when you play it, so unless you're getting, like, people are using removal on it, it's pretty safe. So I like that. I think having an option for a safe unit is important. Of course, she has this upside ability. You do have to build a deck kind of around that a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't say like you need to play 90% of your deck to make this work, but it's nice to at least get like 60% plus to make it work, because being able to hit for 6 is a lot more than being able to hit for 4. It's a strong unit. I think it gives a lot of options on that turn 3 play to just, play this, and then your opponent, if they can't kill it, they need to decide if they're going to claim so they can kill it before she attacks, because that loop starts right after, if you're able to get initiative, attack with Sabine, and then bam, she's back into not being able to be attacked. So a really cool ability. Shadowed Intentions, I just think this might end up being a really important sideboard card into like hard control decks that really just need to use removal to beat your units, right? And being able to throw this on not just the leader, but like basically any unit, and say you can't deal with this unless you commit units to the ground to fight it, is good. And like, of course, like damage-based removal does work, but damage-based removal is not that prominent, and I don't know how prominent like red controlling decks will be. But this card is very good at just like bricking, take down Fell the Dragon, Rivals Fall, Power of the Dark Side, like all that stuff. So like some decks that have notoriously been able to just kind of like prolong these games, get the Super Laser Blast, like Reset, Avenger, like none of that stuff works. If you just like, I know it's +0/+0, right? But if you just like flip a leader and throw this on them, as currently constructed, or as they were constructed at the end of set 2, a lot of decks just won't be able to beat that, right? So I think this is something to look out for, depending on how the meta evolves. And the last card here, I added this one very recently to like the top of my considerations, mostly because of how well I think it plays into space aggro decks. When I first looked at this, defeating a unit with 2 or less health, I didn't think Devastating Gunship was going to do a ton. But so many space units, especially aggressive space units, 7th Fleet Defender, right? Kylo's Tie, the P-38, like there's just a lot that have 2 health. So this being able to come down and kill it, and then more importantly, this with Energy Conversion Lab, being able to kind of double tap, kill 2 space units, and then leave behind something that might have 6 power in space because of the grit, is really nice. Of course, the Grit synergizes really well with Kira as well. So if you were trying to do something like that, you can play it, you can pump it to a shield and get more power. So I think Devastating Gunship is a bit of a meta call, and I think it's a card that could like creep up into like much more prominence depending on the kind of cards and decks we're trying to combat. All right, here's the top 10. So spent a lot of time in the honorable mentions. We're going to spend about the same amount of time on these. So, you know, that's not really, it all kind of mushes together, right? But at 10, I put Calculating Magna Guard. You know, this, I think the difference between this card and something like Cell Block Guard or Phase 3 Trooper from the previous set, the 3/3 Sentinels that cost 3, I think is tremendous. I think the fact that this you can play and it just doesn't die to your opponent's turn 1 play is wildly more important than anything the 3/3 Sentinels provide. I know this Sentinel isn't permanent. It's usually just for the turn. Of course, it can get it later if you were able to like trade a unit. But for the most part, this is coming in to be a one-time thing, but it's very powerful at doing that. It comes out of Vader if needed. It keeps up a blue count for anything with Lieutenant Chilton if you're trying to do that. I think this card is just quietly very important for villain blue decks and will be kind of a staple-ish card in those archetypes. At 9, I put General's Blade. I'm just a big fan of these lightsabers in general, right? Like, no pun intended, but like Jedi lightsaber, Fallen lightsaber, these +3/+3 is really good. And like often just without any of the text on there, playing this on your turn 1 play can put a lot of decks that don't interact well with units specifically can struggle. Like I think turn 2 lightsaber on turn 1 unit is a very powerful play against Sabine just in general. You really can gum up the ground with a unit like that for quite a few turns. Now we got a lot of upside on this additionally because of this text. It worked, like that 2-cost reduction is quite powerful. I see it played with something like Quinlan, who you can flip on 5, you can attach this, next turn you can attack, and you can play an 8-cost unit, think Home 1 or something like that. There are some cheaper Jedis that can trigger this as well. So overall, I'm just pretty happy that there's just another like good upgrade like this to play, right? Because before, if you wanted to do this like really beefy upgrade, you needed to be in blue, especially if you were in hero, right? Or in red if you were in villain. And we've got a really solid option now in green for this card. For that strategy, sorry. All right, at 8, this one, maybe I'm like overrating it. I just kind of wanted to talk about this. I think this is the kind of card, Unmasking the Conspiracy, for those listening, that is going to be pretty important at some point. It reminds me a little bit of like the like overall trend that happened with Bazine Natal in set 2, where I kind of rated that card incredibly highly, and then it didn't see a ton of play at first, but then became like a very core and important piece of maybe the best deck in the format. And I don't know if Unmasking the Conspiracy is going to get to that level of importance, but I do think a 1-cost targeted discard ability is not something to sleep on. This will be really powerful in some situations, especially in situations where like card advantage is not the name of the game, and just picking and like blocking very important sequences from your opponent is. And 1 cost, yeah, just don't underrate. Always remember this card exists when you're building. It might be a sideboard thing that you do. Maybe control decks will struggle with a card like this because they really require certain cards on certain turns to be able to turn the corner. And just being able to do this for so cheap, right? Spark of Rebellion is a very powerful card, and it costs 2. Of course, it doesn't make you discard your own card, but costing 1 is a lot better than costing 2. It scales kind of exponentially. So, yeah, I think this card at some point will be important. All right, number 7, got a legendary here. Now there are 2 of them. I think maybe I'm overrating it. Maybe I'm underrating it. It's kind of a card that I struggle a little bit like deciding if it's actually something I want to build around. I put it in a lot of decks. It's good sometimes and it's not good sometimes, but there's a lot of ceiling here. I think the turn 1 unit into like a turn 2 5-drop can be very powerful into some strategies. I think Underworld has been a very common one to use, but I think like Republic and Force has also been pretty usable, because you've got big chunky 5-cost units. Like in Hero, you got like Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Anakin Skywalker, stuff like this, just big units that you can play on turn 2. In Villain, you've got things like Zuckuss, Bosk. There's others, right? Of course. And then the next step is usually like the 7s, right? You can like cheat out a Cad Bane early with this, especially with like leaders that match his traits, or using something like Jabba the Hutt to find this card and play it. And then in Heroes, things like Luke coming out early, or even Obi-Wan or something like that can be really powerful. There's just a lot though that you have to like consider, right? You have to build your deck to kind of make this work. It means like most of your turn 1 plays, if not all, need to match the types of your turn 2 cheated out plays. Maybe your 7s need to match. So it does require a lot of deck building consideration. There's the issue with only being able to play 1 unit. So there's just like, on both ends, while you have so much upside, you also have so much deck building cost to do this. So I could see at some point maybe decks just say it's not worth it. It's not winning me enough games. Like, it's nice when it works, but there's still counterplay to it between bounce or just hard removal that sets you back a ton. So we'll see where this ends up. I like to put it high for now just because, it's an exciting card, and we'll definitely like need to keep vetting it. All right, at 6, R2-D2, one of the better 2-drop units. Yeah, it's well statted, 2-4. Of course, it's not like a very aggressive stat line. You usually prefer 3 power on your turn 1 play, but that filtering ability, although not always awesome, especially like on the first turn of the game, you've already kind of curated your hand by resourcing 2 cards. So in many cases, I haven't even been using R2's ability on turn 1 when I play it. But I think having 4 health is really good, especially when you pair this with leaders that can like pump its attack, something like Anakin. Then this is like one of the better turn 1 plays because it can survive anything your opponent does, and then of course trade up if needed to. But yeah, I just think having access to like a really solid 2-cost unit. It's got the Republic trait as well. So from the card we just talked about, now there are 2 of them that can enable like the turn 2 Republic 5-drop. So there's a lot going on with this. It's not a terrible later turn drop just because of the filtering ability. So R2's a powerful 2-drop, and I think we'll continue to see a lot of play just like on its innate power, and not even because of any synergy specific stuff often. All right, number 5 is Huyang. He's cool. Well, he's a droid and he's a Jedi, so he can carry that general's saber that we talked about. I just think it puts your opponent a little bit in the bind sometimes because he's got a decent amount of health, so he's not trivial to remove. And then the unit he's pumping, of course, is not trivial to remove. It's a little bit like Wing Leader. Now, Wing Leader, the buff is permanent, but the unit is much worse. And also the in the case of Wing Leader, it like has to be a specific unit type, and you have to build your deck a little more cohesively. And here, it's just in generic green. It can be any unit, so that's pretty good, right? You're pumping Sentinels if you need it, just pumping Leaders if you need it, and kind of putting a target on this 2/4's back instead of on the unit itself. So even if they remove the unit you pumped, you now have a 2/4 instead of like a 2/1 in Wing Leader's case. Huyang's just pretty powerful. I don't think it's going to like be a slam dunk in every green deck, but being able to be played in Villainous and Heroism, I think definitely pumps up like the value of this card a little bit. Just it's going to be an option in more things, and yeah, I just think it's a really solid unit. All right, number 4, Perilous Position. This card's really great. This is like a really beefed up version of Make an Opening, and these other, I mean, there's a few, they actually made a couple in this set. There's also Equalize, which I think is also very good. It's just the mono blue card, so it's not going to see nearly as much wide range application, but -2/-2 on a 3-cost has been good enough to see play when it was Make an Opening. There's just a lot of units that this can defeat that are difficult to defeat. Think Lurking Tie, 7th Fleet Defender. But what's so exciting about this is not only is this permanent, right? It's -2/-2. It's an upgrade. So if you can't defeat the unit, you can still shrink it and then maybe get rid of it later, or just make it not a very impactful unit. But it exhausts the unit too, so that's huge. And this works really well against leaders because of that, or other high threat or high priority targets. You're getting a lot. You're getting a permanent debuff. You get the exhaust that turn, so if you can't defeat it, it's still saving you health just based on that. So Perilous Position is fantastic. It's going to be an important card, and not much else to say there. At number 3, another legendary. This is Cad Bane. This is just a really good finisher for yellow villain decks. That capture ability can really stabilize. You can get a few things off the board. He's a really big beater as well, right? 7/7. He's got the Underworld trait, which helps with the cheating out thing with the now there are two of them, whatever. And yeah, I think while I don't think necessarily the ceiling here is as like powerful sometimes as something like a Vader or a Luke, I think being able to do this again, like how good this is will depend a lot on like how much removal people are packing for this. And right now, I think this card would be tremendous because I think this card is very good into like space aggro decks, right? Where you get to like remove a few units at once. You get a giant unit that is difficult for these decks to interact with, and you can really like set sail right after that. So Cad Bane is just a great option for decks that just needed like a top end that might not have had it. Especially in things like yellow, which did not have a very good top end at 7, or even red villain, right? Most of the good ones were just in green, especially for the villains, right? So it now exists in another color. It's very good. Capture is not a bad mechanic. I just think a lot of the support cards for capture weren't very powerful in set 2, but here we just have a great one. And remember, when something gets rescued, it comes into play exhausted, and it does not trigger when played effects. So even if they remove it, or if you attack with it and they like claim back one of their units and give you the 2 cards, you're still getting a lot of value, and you can win a lot of races with this card because of how many units it can actually remove all at once without also triggering when defeated effects like K2 or Ruthless Raider, which are both very popular cards right now. So very useful unit to have. All right, number 2, another yellow villain card. This is Elite P38 Starfighter. This card's crazy. It's a 3/2 with a when played and when defeated deal 1 damage to a unit. So it fits in a long line of very powerful 3-cost villain space units with 7 Fleet Defender and Lurking Tide. They all do something a little different, and they all do something very powerful. But Elite P38, especially with Django Leader, is crazy. This coming in and exhausting a unit on enter, and then also doing it when it dies. It enables Tarkentown if you need it to. It can trade with 7 Fleet Defender, right? Because it can enter, ping that shield if you need. It's just great. It even 1-for-1s with Concord Dawn, because even if they played the Concord Dawn after you played this when defeated will do that 4th damage. So Elite P38 is a fantastic card. I think it's one of the best cards in this set, and it goes really through the roof when you pair it with Django. All right, and number 1, another yellow card. So a lot of yellow cards, both in hero and villain, have been on this list in general, but Plo Koon is awesome. His Coordinate turns out not that hard to trigger. Coordinate, I think the bigger issue with Coordinate has been that most of the units with Coordinate just aren't very powerful. But Plo is very powerful. It gives you an absolute through the roof ceiling when the Coordinate is on, something I would have liked more Coordinate cards to have. I think a lot of the time we see these Coordinate cards, and when you have Coordinate, they become on rate units. Like my favorite example is there's like a 1/3 in red that has Coordinate +2 attack, and it costs 2, right? It becomes a Battlefield Marine if you have Coordinate. Well, let's just play Battlefield Marine then, right? But there is no card that even comes close to replicating a 6-power ambush on 5 without needing to use Energy Conversion Lab, of course. So this Coordinate is very, very powerful, and it works well with leaders that you can deploy earlier, 5-cost leaders, 4-cost leaders, but doesn't even have to be only with those leaders. It's not always that difficult to trigger this, to make this the 3rd unit. And the floor here is actually not that bad either, because it still kills a lot of units and leaves behind something pretty powerful. So Plo Koon is very, very good just on rate card. Again, I'm not going to predict that this will be everywhere, because I don't know if yellow hero decks will be everywhere. But Plo Koon will be in yellow hero decks, will be quite powerful. He even has Force Trait, something that is great if you're playing things like Force Throw. He enables that. The 6 health on him is tremendous. Yeah, Plo Koon is how I wish more Coordinate was done, and very happy to slam this guy in a lot of decks. All right, that's what I got for you. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of these cards. Let me know if there's any cards that you think are really powerful that I did not mention. This is not an all-inclusive thing. There's definitely other things that I thought about putting here. There's things that are on here that I thought maybe they shouldn't be, but these are the ones I ended up picking, the ones I wanted to talk about. And yeah, I hope to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care.